Welcome to the PodCatechist, the first episode, the inaugural episode of the PodCatechist. My name is Baylor Griffin. Thank you so much for joining me and giving this podcast a chance. Really glad to have you here. I hope you caught the welcome episode before jumping into episode 1. I know that's kind of a weird thing, splitting up the welcome in episode 1, but we did it. And I'm going to build on an idea that I introduced in the welcome episode, which was that all of us in some way are like C.S. Lewis's Prince Caspian. Caspian is several hundred years after the events of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, if I remember correctly. And at that time, Narnia is ruled by a tyrant who wants to erase everything good, true, and beautiful about the past. He wants that to be forgotten. I'm sure you've heard this adage before. It goes something like, whoever controls the present controls the past, and whoever controls the past controls the future. And that's what this king is ultimately doing. He's a tyrant, and he wants control. He wants power, and controlling the narrative, controlling the story, controlling history, and telling everyone lies about where they came from and how the world works. That's a way he controls the people. So this means that teachers in Narnia at the time were not allowed to talk about the true history of the old Narnia and how glorious it really was. And so you have Caspian, who grows up in the king's house and grew up being taught lies and half-truths about the world. But every now and again, the truth would kind of leak out, as it always does. You can't always bury the truth. It eventually conquers. It always eventually comes to light. And C.S. Lewis is demonstrating that in this story, that like little whiffs of the old Narnia leak out every now and again, until eventually Caspian finds out the whole truth, that he's been lied to this entire time, and everything he was told was fairy tale was actually reality. And that's really when his adventures begin. Now, why does that matter? Well, what I ended the episode saying was this: like Caspian, you have been lied to, right? If you're anything like me, you've been lied to. If you're like me, you grew up in the West in a kind of modern evangelical context, and a lot of the things that we've been led to believe about reality, about truth, about even Christianity itself and our history, they're just not true. They're not true, or at least they're only half true. What I'm trying to say is this: you have been catechized, right? To catechize, that's just an old Christian word that means to teach the fundamentals about reality. It's learning the basics about reality, truth, goodness, beauty. Another word we might use that's kind of related to this is worldview, right? You've been given a particular worldview. You've been given a particular catechism. I'm sure you've heard some of these words before for various reasons, but it's your catechism or your worldview that answers questions like, what is the world? Where did it come from? How does it work? What is its purpose and your purpose in it? What is ultimately true? What is ultimately good? What is ultimately beautiful? What is our history? What is the point of our history, right? How you answer those kinds of questions, that's your worldview. Or again, that is your catechism. And you might not even realize that you have a worldview or that you've been catechized into thinking in certain ways, but you have. And newsflash, it didn't come from nowhere. We have all been taught some underlying assumptions about reality, and we were taught them on purpose. And those assumptions about reality impact how we live and the decisions that we make every single day. So the problem is, like Caspian, for a lot of us, those assumptions, that catechism, that worldview that we were raised in, often was anti-Christian, or at least had some very anti-Christian ideas baked into it. And yes, this is the case even if you grew up in a Christian home and went to church every week. A lot of these anti-Christian ideas have actually taken root in the church over time and made their way even into pulpits. So what kind of things am I talking about here? Like, I can kind of talk vaguely about this all day, but let's actually take just a couple of quick examples. I'll do like one big one, and then I'll fire quickly a couple more. So first example, one of the things that's just baked into the cultural pie that we're all spoon-fed constantly at this point is that you ought to follow your heart. Follow your heart, right? How many times have you heard something along those lines, right? That catechism, right, that worldview is everywhere, and it shows up in all sorts of ways, right? We're told, by and large, by children's media, actually, like children's movies, but also like movies that are supposed to technically be for adults too, like you see it constantly. We are told that deep down on the inside is the real you, and that real you is magical and amazing. It has this like, the real you has this like spark of, divinity or whatever. And if we could just learn to accept that, learn to accept who we are, accept ourselves, and accept each other for who we really are, then we'll realize how amazing everybody is and how amazing we are ourselves, and all of our dreams will come true. And the real enemy, the real evil that you have is the society that you're in and your family who is misunderstanding you and holding you back. And so the solution is remember who you are, be true to yourself, follow your heart, and that's the key to freedom. That's the key to happily ever after and all your dreams coming true. This has been drilled into us incessantly for decades. It is the Hollywood catechism of especially Western children's media, right? Disney movies in particular have been relentlessly shoving this narrative down our throats for literally decades. Okay. And look, I'm not one to just harp on Disney for no reason. When my wife was pregnant last fall with our second born, we took a vacation to Florida, and we decided to spend, one day taking our 3-year-old to Disney World while we were there. And honestly, it was a really lovely time. We made great memories that day, rode a lot of really cool rides. But you have to understand that their whole follow your heart messaging in their media is a lie. It's a total lie. And it's a lie aimed directly at the hearts of children through storytelling. That's how they catechize the kids when they're most moldable and influenceable, and the most foundational building blocks of their worldview are being laid. That's when they say, let's make sure these kids know that they need to follow their heart. And it's a lie. It's a total lie. They don't need to follow their heart. Neither do you, neither do I. Let me read you 2 verses real quick. Both are from the prophet Jeremiah. First, listen to Jeremiah 10:23. It says, "O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps." Okay, let me read that first part again. I know that the way of man is not in himself. Don't follow your heart. That's not how you're going to find the way. It's not in you, right? You have to look to God. You have to look to Christ for your direction, to look to Christ for truth, to look to the Lord. Looking inside of yourself is not how you're going to find the way. Jesus is the way. You're not going to find the way looking in your heart. And the second one, which I'm sure you've heard it before, is Jeremiah 17, verse 9, which says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So again, the culture says, follow your heart. Look inside. Let the dreams of your heart guide you. You just need to be more authentic, and everyone else needs to accept the real you. Follow your heart. All your dreams will come true. Jeremiah says, actually, your heart is going to lie to you a lot. like disproportionately more than other things. Your heart is deceitful above all things. And so if you look inside, you're not going to figure anything out. You're just going to find wickedness. You're going to find disappointment if you follow your heart. It will lead you straight to hell, actually, and lie to you the whole way there. And so why would you follow your heart, right? God is trying to tell you that that's a terrible idea. Don't follow your heart. It will only lead you further into deception and wickedness. Follow Christ. Seek his grace and forgiveness. Follow his gospel. Follow his law. That's the key to a fulfilling life. And that's where the adventure is, right? So again, the idea is that we have been catechized to think in ways that are fundamentally anti-Christian and are ultimately destructive. And one example of this is the whole, follow your heart thing. from here, I'll just give you a few quick snapshot examples. One example of a catechism that we've all grown up with is this idea that C.S. Lewis calls chronological snobbery. I won't go into it too deeply, but suffice it to say, we moderns truly think we are so much smarter and so much wiser and so much more inclusive and so much better off than the generations before us, right? Everyone before me, everyone before my generation got it wrong. We've got it right. We finally know what the Bible actually, after 2,000 years of Christianity and the church, we finally know what the Bible says, and we're the first generation to get it right on this particular topic. That is absolute snobbery. That is absolute nonsense. No, we are not smarter. We are not wiser than our forefathers. We might have certain luxuries that they didn't have, like air conditioning and dentistry, but to pretend that they were these like illiterate peasants rolling around in the mud who couldn't tell their right hand from their left, it's an ignorant way to look at our history, an ignorant way to look back in time at our forefathers, especially our forefathers in the faith. And again, it's a lie that runs directly in contradiction to the Bible, which says to honor thy fathers, honor your fathers and your grandparents. And that includes your fathers in the faith, not just your physical fathers, but your forefathers in the faith. Not only do we do this broadly in terms of like history, but we also do it just randomly, like dishonoring our fathers. Have you noticed that literally every sitcom since like the 80s at least, the dad is just an absolute buffoon? Like, this is how we see our fathers. We see them as complete idiots, absolute duds that don't know anything and are really inconvenient to be around, just want to sit on the couch and watch TV. They're the comic relief of like most sitcoms because they're portrayed as dumb. That is like the classic sitcom dad trope. And again, that's just an anti-Christian idea. We ought to be honoring our fathers. So there's that, and then maybe another example would be the lie of materialism, right? We have been trained to think that the world is just stuff, and there's a lot of great theologians and pastors and good men doing good work to kind of undo that lie. But unfortunately, a lot of Christians have bought into this idea of materialism. And it's a total anti-Christian lie. And a lot of Christians nowadays seem to be more materialistic than unbelievers half the time. It's really, really baffling. We've also been taught that we are primarily consumers, that your existence is to watch Marvel movies and play video games and never leave your apartment and work on your computer in your apartment and have food delivered to you in your apartment. No contact with the world God made in any meaningful sense, except maybe to go out and get drunk with a couple of work buddies on the weekend. It's just consume. Isolated, lonely consumption. And we call that like having fun. This is a lie. You were not made to live like this, and you know it. You were made to have a fruitful and multiplying life. That goes all the way back to Genesis. That truth that you were meant to be fruitful and multiply, not to be constantly devouring and consuming everything around you. This is where the chronological snobbery thing comes up again. Life hasn't always been this way. Life was actually a lot better for a lot of people, particularly in the Christian West, despite having, no air conditioning and other innovations, right? But there was a very real sense that the life that they actually did live was way more vibrant and fruitful and electric and connected. And so while some things have certainly gotten better, right, there are ways in which our lives are actually a lot worse culturally and familially, and those sorts of things. So anyway, you're not a consumer. You're not meant to live life like an isolated consumer. That's a lie. I could go on, and Lord willing, I will in future episodes. But for now, I think you get the point. These are just a few examples that I hope you can relate to, and you can see in your own life where we as a culture, we have been catechized. We all have. And some have had a more Christian catechism than others, and praise God, but even those of us raised in good, godly Christian homes might find ourselves thinking in anti-Christian ways because of just the constant barrage of effective anti-Christian propaganda and its ideas and concepts that are just beaten into us. So you have been lied to, Caspian. And the goal here at the PodCatechist is to expose lies and be a help to you, help you think Christianly about all of life. And I think that's the vision. It really is possible to re-catechize and win back the West. So before we wrap up episode 1, just want to give you a couple more things to consider. This show, this podcast, whatever you want to call it, is going to be called the PodCatechist. And so for segment 2 of our episodes, we're going to try going through an actual historic Christian catechism. I'll explain what that is in a second, but the reason why I want to do this is because if we have been catechized into believing anti-Christian lies, the way we fix that is not just by exposing the lie, but we must also know the truth. The truth is what exposes the lie, is what I'm trying to say. And so the way to break an anti-Christian catechism is to bring in a Christian one. Like I said earlier, the word catechize or catechism, it comes from the Greek word katecheo, which means to teach. You're going to find that word multiple places in the New Testament, like Luke 1:4, for example. But the word catechism is primarily used to describe a Christian method of teaching that goes all the way back to like early Christianity, like 2nd, 3rd century. Hippolytus, for example, writes about it. He was a bishop in the 200s. So that's a long time that Christians have been utilizing catechisms. And how it is usually formatted is in the format of a question and answer. So, for example, I've been working through a children's catechism with our 3-year-old, and she's doing a great job. She's got a few questions down already, totally memorized. And how it works is I ask her the question, she memorizes the question by me asking it to her, and she also memorizes the answer and gives that back to me. So, very simple. You can go up to my daughter right now and ask her these questions and see if she nails it. If she's not goofing around, she will nail it and get it right. So it's very simple. I'll go up to her, Sparrow, who made you? And she'll say, God. I'll say, great. What else did God make? And she'll say, everything. And then I'll say, awesome. Why did God make everything? And she'll kind of throw her fist in the air, maybe give you a little wink, and she'll say, for his glory. And so, that's as far as we've gotten. She's 3. She's doing a great job. We're memorizing other things too, like scripture and whatnot, but that is a very, very simple, basic version of what a catechism is. It's usually formatted in question and answers. And what are you doing when you're doing that? You are instilling a Christian worldview, a Christian way of viewing reality. That's what we're trying to do here at the PodCatechist. A famous example of catechism is the Westminster Shorter Catechism, question 1. What is the chief end of man? That's the question. What's man's chief end? What's man's purpose? Why do we exist, in other words? What's the chief end? What's the end game here? The Westminster Shorter Catechism, the answer to that question, question 1, what is the chief end of man? The answer, to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Man, that's so good. So that's a catechism, and we are going to work through C.H. Spurgeon's, what he calls a Puritan catechism, together here on the PodCatechist. For the last segment here, just to wrap up the episode, the last thing that I want to do is leave you with a little book recommendation or a book review. And for the first few, I want to give you some of the books that have had the greatest impact on my life. And so I've already read you actually a good portion of this, but I want to recommend that if you haven't read it, or if you haven't read it in a long time, or if you have kids and haven't read it out loud to your kids, pick up The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. You might be, have a bit of an aversion to doing any of that at first, because you're like, why would I pick up a children's story? But I promise you that you are going to find insights about the way the world works and the way it actually is that would shock you are in a children's tale. So for example, one of the really, really cool things that C.S. Lewis does is there's one particular character in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first book, which, by the way, I do recommend that you read it in read it in publication order. Read it in the order that it was released. I forget who said it, but someone said the way into Narnia is through the wardrobe. So don't start with The Magician's Nephew, which is chronologically the first book. Start with the way it was published, because I think that that's just the best way to fall in love with the world and really understand what was going on. That's my advice. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. Just read Narnia. So anyway, there's this character in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I'm not going to tell you who, but in the beginning of the book, you just despise this guy. He's an absolute dweeb. And and C.S. Lewis does a really good job as an author of making you dislike him, where you're like, you're so annoying and you do everything wrong. And then there's this wonderful kind of like bait and switch moment where you realize you are that character. Like you are the character that's causing all the problems, and someone else has to come in and fix it. And I won't give away too much if you haven't read Narnia. If you have read Narnia, hopefully you know exactly what I'm talking about. That the sacrifice that was made really demonstrates that, oh my gosh, like I'm that character and I was the whole time. And C.S. Lewis just does an incredible job with that. He does it again in later books, another kind of Nathan the prophet coming to David moment where he says, you are the man, kind of tells this story and then gives you kind of the bait and switch at the end that says, actually, I was talking about you the whole time. Really cool kind of literary storytelling device there. But all that to say, you should read Narnia. You should read Narnia to your kids. You should read it. And even if you've read it before, read it again. And the reason is because it is a really good catechizing story. You will understand yourself better. You will understand our actual world better by looking at Narnia. You will understand our history better. You will understand people's behavior better. You really will. And good storytelling is supposed to do that. The best stories catechize you. And again, I was talking about the whole follow your heart thing earlier. The primary medium by which that doctrine, that catechism has been disseminated to our generation has been through children's media, through children's storytelling. It hasn't been just sitting down and saying, what should you do? Answer, follow your heart, right? It hasn't been that kind of catechism, but it has been an incredibly effective one because stories teach you how to view the world. Stories teach you how to read your own story, if that makes sense. And there's lots of resources on that topic specifically that I can recommend to you in the future. If you want to reach out to me, I have a few recommendations there. I'm not just getting that phrase, read your own story, from nowhere. But let's focus on C.S. Lewis for now. You should read Narnia because it will re-catechize you, especially if you've never read it or if you haven't read it in a long time. The clarity that will come from reading a great story like that, I think you will find incredibly helpful. Thanks for listening. This has been the PodCatechist.